Hello, and welcome to Understanding Cyber with me, Matt, and
me, Tom.
And finally, welcome back to Toby. And we will reintroduce you as the star of the show.
Oh, wow. I know that I've got like a whole 3 lines in this, so the star has got a massive part. Maybe we have to renegotiate some kind of like royalty system from this.
Yeah, we've understood what people wanted, and there wasn't nearly enough Toby, and so we've got to bring you back in.
Don't worry, I was having deep joy editing out various different noises of things and putting the music in, which I know everyone loves.
Well, we're glad to have you back, and thank you for saving your time for us. This is the final episode in our 4-part series about cyber risk management, and we're talking about assurance today, also known as, Toby?
Apparently, how CISOs sleep at night.
So far in the series, we've covered the areas where people and organizations go wrong with risk, talking about over-reliance on checklists, not balancing their security controls, often identifying risk, not doing anything about it, refusing to accept them, or pursuing the impossible task of trying to drive them all to zero. And in the second episode, we then talked about making risk identification easier. We talked about tools like red teaming, counterfactuals, pre-mortems. And then the last episode, we looked at risk management techniques and discussed how we can view risk acceptance as a considered decision based on a variety of relevant factors, so cost, practicality, risk tolerance, etc., rather than just trying to take a gamble. We also examined how we can focus harder on reducing the impact of a risk with things like business continuity plans, exercises, insurance, and comms plans. If you haven't listened to these episodes, then we heartily encourage you go back to episode 1 or 2 or 3, depending on where you got to, and finish those. Because in this part, we're going to explore how we sustain our risk management program in efficient and an effective way. So no one wants to spend their entire time repeatedly starting from episode 1 again, and doing that identification or analysis, even with our fantastic advice. And if you do wish to go back and listen to our podcast weekly, we heartily encourage it. But the world changes, businesses change, and therefore risks change. And so how do we keep up and make sure we're doing the right things in the right way for the right reason? Spoiler, the answer is assurance. Tom?
It sure is, Matt. It sure is. I'll be the first to admit, so I'm going to be doing a lot of talking in this one. I'll be the first to admit assurance is not, at first glance, the most exciting topic in the world, and we're going to have to think very hard about an exciting title for this podcast.
I'm so glad I've come back for this one.
Absolutely,
perfectly.
We'll get you on the case, Toby. You can write the title this time.
Oh, thanks.
Sure enough, there are plenty. So first of all, it is the answer. There are plenty of books out there which will definitely put you to sleep. Our aim here today is to put you to sleep for all the right reasons, which is to make you feel comfortable and safe and secure. Safe in the knowledge, sound in the knowledge that what you're doing from a cybersecurity perspective is being done properly. You're doing the right stuff for the right reasons in the right way. So doing assurance. It's all about assurance, or as I prefer to call it, making sure you don't get caught out, basically. Assurance itself, it's like, think of it as a counterpart to security, right? So if security is managing your security risk by applying controls, that traditional definition, assurance is making sure that those security controls are actually correct, that they are the right choice, that you've implemented them properly, and that they're working as intended. So let's think of something really familiar like home security. I don't want people wandering in and out of my front door who aren't supposed to be there. So I'm going to put a lock on that door, and I'm going to have a key for that lock, and I'm going to only give it to people who I want to come in and out. And I look at it and I say, well, given the risk of people coming in and out, is that the right thing to do? Is a lock appropriate? Well, yeah, it is appropriate, actually. Is it implemented correctly? Have I stuck it on the right side of the door? And have I ensured that only people with a key can get in it? Yes, I can, absolutely. And is it working as intended? If I try it with the key, it opens. If I try it with something other than the key, does it not open? Yeah, cool, it's working as intended. Cool, my door lock is the correct control for this front door. Brilliant. And it's the same thing in cyber, and we'll get into examples in a minute. But fundamentally, it helps us decide if there are risks or controls or mechanisms or other things which we should add or withdraw or augment or adjust. It's all about doing things properly, which sounds a little bit dry at first, but it can save you a lot of money, a lot of headaches, and also give you a lot more sleep.
That's useful and interesting. And I suppose we've given some definitions, but the thing we really have to do is start thinking of what sort of stuff could we actually include in assurance then?
Yeah, it's a big topic, right? And there are big books on lots of it. There are many ways of looking at it. I'll talk later on, or will talk later on about the NCSC, for example, their kind of perspective on it, which is not the only one. It's an interesting one. But
are we going to go an episode without ever mentioning the NCSC? I feel like we need an NCSC swear jar or something like that at the moment.
We're hoping for sponsorship, which they won't do because they're a government department. But no, we need to. They're good. They're good, so we like to mention them. So they're credible, and they give us a lot of good ideas. So why not? But let's go from first principles, right, rather than going into the big stuff here. So the first thing to do, and I know this is dry, but it is important because we encounter people who haven't really done this, which is just look at your risk register, right, and make sure, you can hear everyone sighing in the background, make sure it's correct, right? You should be doing this routinely anyway. If you don't do anything more advanced than that and you haven't done this, go back and do it, right? It's basics. Look at your risk register and make sure it's in a sensible place, right? When you go through it, look at the management approaches to stuff and make sure those are correct too. So previously we talked about treat, tolerate, terminate, transfer. Is your approach to a given risk still the right thing to be doing? Should you still be tolerating that, or has that risk crept up a bit over time and now actually it's beyond your threshold and now is the time to start treating it? Or, yeah, you've been transferring that one for insurance for a long, long time, but actually maybe you should bring that in-house or give it to a third party, a different third party, for example. So just checking your general approach. And then we're into the kind of the more detail. Is your control approach correct? Is it the right choice? Is it implemented correctly? And is it achieving what it's supposed to do? And we'll talk a bit later on about how you kind of go through those things. But let's go through a really, really simple example. So let's say I have a risk, and this is quite a common one. I'm worried about unauthorized access or unauthorized takeover of the IT accounts that belong to my senior managers. So whether their credentials get stolen or someone exploits their system or something, or impersonates them, somebody getting hold of their IT account, right? So the impact is pretty obvious. We could lose data, or that data could be disclosed, or they could impersonate that person and send emails as if they're that senior manager. And we get in lots of trouble, reputationally, or lose money, etc. So my approach to that is going to be treat. And I think that's the right approach to do. I don't really want to accept that risk on face value. I'd rather do something about it. What am I going to do? I'm going to have a multi-layered approach because we love that. Complex passwords. So nice long password for my senior managers, nothing like 3 letters or password 1. I'm going to enforce, I'm going to come back to that word in a minute, multi-factor authentication. And I'm going to give them some annual training on credential management. So don't leave your password stuck to the bottom of the keyboard because they will be checking. And if I find it there, I'll be upset. Is that appropriate? Yes, it is appropriate. What would not be appropriate, by contrast, are things like just training on its own, probably not enough, depends how good your senior manager is. And certainly like a completely unrelated control like DKIM, which is an email security thing. That's not really going to help you with this. It might do a little bit, but not really. Next thing to do is, right, are they implemented correctly? So it could be that for this person's, like let's say it's the Office 365 account, we've enabled multi-factor authentication. We haven't enforced it. So that person has the option not to use it. That's not good enough for me.
But we never see that in the real world, do we, Tom?
We never see that.
Oh, wait.
Have you enforced MFA for all your staff? Absolutely. Goes to Office 365 admin portal, checks it. It's enabled, it's not enforced, and no one's using it, which is why you've been hooped. No.
And I suppose that's I suppose it's linked to assurance, or it's a large part of assurance, that the devil's in the detail here, and it's about sometimes asking the difficult questions, not just the easy ones.
It really is. It's one step beyond the checkbox. It's like, are we doing this? And it's like, are we doing it properly? And are we really doing it?
It's going to ask someone quietly when you get them alone.
Yeah.
The underlying InfoSec mantra of trust. Yeah, cool. I'll trust you to do it, but I'm going to verify you've actually done it. Right. So trust but verify is such a, like we hear it bandied around all the time. That's what Tom's talking about here. It's like, yeah, I trust that you've enforced MFA, but we can all make mistakes. So I'll verify that it's in and working correctly, because who knows how all these things work. Even if you click the right box, I don't trust Microsoft not to have changed it this week and it being a different place or not propagate through correctly.
Absolutely, yeah. And this isn't supposed to be a witch hunt. You're right. There's a cultural thing here around when you're engaging with other people about this. Yeah, not being exactly as you described, not being accusatory. It's collaborative, team effort. Are we doing this properly? Things change, especially in Microsoft land, things change. And who knows which settings are default this week and change next week. Others do the same thing too. So yeah, definitely trust, but absolutely verify. And then we're into the, are these things achieving, are these controls achieving what they're supposed to? Are they providing me with the level of security, the level of risk management effectively that they're supposed to? And this is where things like threat modeling or even dedicated assessments like penetration testing or vulnerability assessments can come in. They can go in and check for you that these things are working. You don't have to go down that route all the time, right? You can just use common sense. But in any event, the answer really does depend on risk. If you're worried about sophisticated threat actors doing this kind of thing, you might say, happy with all these controls, but when it comes to multi-factor authentication, I'm not happy with text message based, because a sophisticated threat actor or a motivated threat actor could get around that. I want only an application based MFA or FIDO2 or something like that. So those are your basic steps. Look at my risks. Am I taking the right approach? What controls do I have in place? Are they appropriate? Are they implemented correctly? Are they working?
Okay. So we've hinted about my next question a bit throughout, I suppose, but to make it really clear, why do we need assurance? Why can't we just do our controls and then carry on?
So we can still make money. No, it's actually not so. It's not much less than that.
The bits in brackets you're not supposed to read.
Sorry,
Tom.
internal voice, Tom.
No, exactly it. But it's true. It would be great, and I genuinely would love it if we were out of a job, because you could just do security once and walk away, dust your hands, and say, "I did the risk management, and I'm done." The fact is, things change, right? We have new customers, we work with new partners or suppliers, we expand to new operating environments, whether digitally or physically, whatever. There's new legislation, new compliance obligations, different business functions, transformations, staff come and go, new security technologies, guidelines, other best practices emerge. Right? Stuff is constantly changing, whether we like it or not, and whether we know about it or not. So we need to make sure that our risks and our risk management approaches are up to date. Otherwise, we're soon going to slip out of sync with the real world. And also, there's a kind of, I put the second, but it is almost as important, if not more important, is that doing assurance properly ensures that you're not wasting time, effort, money on inappropriate approaches to risk, right? You're not doing things in the wrong way. You haven't got ineffective controls in place, or controls that are implemented incorrectly, costing you loads of money. And that allows you to be honest with yourself, honest with your customers, honest with your board, whatever. But you're being efficient and effective, effectively.
I mean, it's interesting. Even the simplest examples. How many companies or apps or websites or anything else still enforce the uber mega complex password requirements that make them hard for a human to remember but easy for a machine to guess, despite the fact that this guidance has changed quite a long time ago.
Absolutely. We look at this a lot. We see cloud platforms where we have to check for Cyber Essentials, for example, that they've got MFA available, and they haven't, but they've just got a kind of vaguely long password complexity, and you're like, that's not enough, guys. You probably want to revisit that assessment.
Like, this concept was well grained and well known when Tom and I did our password episode 4 or 5 years ago now. I think we recorded that, and this stuff has been known for ages, and you still encounter it in the wild out there. Just like have random passwords and capital letters of things that just ruin people. Anyway, sorry, rant over.
Yeah, I did a talk the other day to do an audience and ask them what makes a good password, and the number that said, make sure there's a capital letter in there, make sure there's an exclamation mark and things like that. And no one. It's a little bit sad. No one in the audience actually knew what the NCSC's guidance was. And we had to prove it to them why these things are good. But there's a lack of knowledge sometimes. But these sort of changes take so much time to percolate through to everyone that someone does need to go in first and try and make sure they're up to date.
In case it wasn't clear, dear listener, length is the only thing that matters.
That's right. The concept of assurance, sorry to segue away from that one, the concept of assurance though is probably millennia old. I'm sure there's a joke about 2 centurions standing around at some stage talking about assurance. I was going to chuck a spear at my own shield and make sure this thing actually does what it's supposed to do. Otherwise, it's going to be a pretty short fight. Anyway,
sorry,
there's a question in here.
Sorry, I was going to say that. I mean, we went down that sort of sidebar through centurions, length, passwords, and things like that. I suppose the next thing really is how do you do this assurance then? How do you do it? How much do you need? How do you know any of that?
Enough to get enough sleep, I suppose, is one answer. But more precisely, I feel that there are lots of tools and techniques and approaches. And it's a case of choosing the one that suits you as an organization. And I know everyone rolls their eyes when you say that, but it's true. There's no one size fits all, right? If you're a small company with only a few security controls and information security policy, then this could be quite straightforward. If you're an international bank, it might be slightly more involved. I'm not going to lie. The first thing to do, I guess, is think like a risk review and a risk audit. So that's a very standard approach to sort of complete and update your records of controls, inspect or review the risk register line by line, however you want to go through it. Very traditional approach to kind of compliance, but it's not necessarily assurance as such. You're checking compliance with some kind of baseline, but you need to be confident that the baseline you're checking against is up to date. Are the security objectives for your company against which that risk register was written appropriate? Do they reflect the operating environment that you're in and the business functions as well? So applying some kind of context to your risk review, risk audit, and making sure that's up to date is really important too. Security assessment. We've talked about these previously, I think. Have we? Vince is around. Yes,
definitely.
Yes, we have. Good. It's been a while. We did. It even says, we spoke about these before. They're targeted. These are targeted assessments of specific things. So a system, a service, a platform or capability, something you're genuinely interested in, you can point to and say, assure me that thing over there. And that's a really good way to better understand how secure that specific thing is. And this is great when you combine this with some of the concepts we've talked about previously. So when Toby and I talked about figuring out what's important to your organization, if you realize that big, massive application with a huge database behind it, full of all your customer data that you've had for 20 years, that somebody called Dave built back in the day, who's left now, is really important to your organization, guess what? You're probably going to want to do some kind of security assessment of that thing. You should do, probably annually, to make sure that it is doing the business and it's assured. Another good one, that we've done a lot of these actually, a tabletop discussion. And this is a completely different approach altogether. So rather than, line by line going through a risk register or something very meticulous or very precise assessment, this is getting people around a table, literally around a table, or through whatever medium you think is appropriate, and talk to them. Right, guys, what has changed? What do we care about? What are we treating differently? Which things are working, not working? You there, you use our password policy. How do you find it? Is it too complicated to use? You there, you're in security. Is our password policy even the right policy to be having? Is our complexity appropriate? That kind of thing. So getting different people, different disciplines, skill sets involved in that kind of discussion. Before I move on to the rest, chaps, any thoughts on any ones we've said so far?
I always like the idea of these tabletop discussions, because we've mentioned before that matching the sort of technical or best practice security with your business need is always really important. So it's getting the right people in the room, making sure that, we've said that the first people to complain will be the marketing team. That when you assure something, you're making sure that everyone is involved in that assurance, rather than just one person says, "Have we checked it? Yes, we've checked it. Amazing." I think that's a really important point, that nuance.
Absolutely. And you come across, the security function often feels like a bit of a dictatorship, where you're telling people, you must be secure this way, and people don't understand. It becomes much more collaborative as well when you approach it like this, and you get people in and say, look, we're trying to make this work for you, but also we need to make sure it's secure. How's this from a user perspective, how's this working for you? And we can come to some kind of practical solution on it. But yeah, I love a good tabletop. Very different from the kind of the classic, slightly drier approaches. Similar to a tabletop, but even more involved and more advanced, is an exercise, which is exactly what it says in the tin. But there's a whole world of excitement around exercises, different formats, different approaches, different objectives, and so on. You could do something like an incident response exercise, which is exactly what it says. You pretend you have an incident, you examine how you respond. Some kind of scenario-based thing. How would we do X, Y, or Z? How well would we do if this system shut down, or if this office stopped working, or if this many people weren't able to make it in? How well would we perform? How do we adapt to that? So there's the whole world of exercises. We could do another podcast on them as well. Similar to exercises, similar to tabletops, but a different concept again, red teaming techniques. So this is where we, but similar to before, we look at counterfactuals as one example of those, and pre-mortems, and I know we've mentioned this previously. We examine a situation or a scenario or a hypothetical from different perspectives. If this thing was to happen, if this kind of failure were to occur, what if this previous event that we know in history happened, didn't happen, and was different? What could we learn from that? And what can we do sort of going forward? A really good way to examine unusual and strange and weird scenarios that you might face and how you might deal with them.
Cool tip on counterfactuals.
Yes, please.
I was playing around with some large language model using them for counterfactuals earlier today, and they're phenomenal for not Petya, give me 3 ways where the impact could have been worse, or 3 ways the impact could have been lessened, or things like that. And then you can then ask if what controls will enable this, or lack of controls. And they're just really good for idea generation. Not going to give you the answer, but I was using them as a counterfactual tool. They were fantastic. And that allowed me then to create new risk models, new scenarios, different ways it could fail, and make sure my controls are right. But I was just playing around a bit. It seems like another really good use case for LLMs.
That's really cool. Love a good LLM. That's nice. What other approaches could take it? Training. Yeah. So either train your staff individually, collectively, have some kind of policies and procedures for training. And Matt's going to hate me. I'm going to mention the NCSC again. The NCSC has fantastic online training for staff. It's obviously it's generic, but it's cybersecurity training. It's really good. We've rolled that out for a couple of customers recently. I say rolled it out. We've sent them the link because that was all that was involved. But they've got on with it really well. So if you're wondering where to start for that kind of thing, just kind of generic collective training for people, NCSC's got you covered. But there's loads of other more sort of intricate training out there for individuals or collectives, including stuff that we deliver actually. And there's always the kind of slightly philosophical and introspective way of approaching assurance, which is to ask yourself, what is it that I do? How do I maintain confidence that my security function is performing the way it should? Is it gut feel? Is it I walk into the office every morning and check a couple of things? Is it more rigorous than that? But literally asking yourself that question, what do I do to make sure that things work as they should do, is a good way to start considering it from first principles.
That's really interesting. Yeah. Sorry,
So
Toby.
Like I think I summarised all that because quite a lot of stuff that Tom spoke through there. So Tom was talking about how much assurance do you need and how do you do it, and it gave a number of ways of doing it. So starting from one of the most mandrolic, process-driven of doing a risk review, a risk audit, going through your risk register, checking against it, and trusting but verifying things actually happen. A security assessment, whether that is an audit or a pen test or things like that. And again, we've got a podcast on security assessments we did fairly recently. Could be a tabletop discussion, discussing things, looking at things change, or it could be a scenario tabletop discussion as an exercise, something like that. And then Tom mentioned red teaming techniques, things that allow you to view it differently and see if different things become a priority. Counterfactuals and pre-mortems are one way of doing that, and we roll those out all the time. It work really well. Training, assurance of people doing their jobs, how to do their jobs, so like personal, individual assurance, team assurance, and business assurance. And then just simply asking yourself, how can I do it? There are a whole bunch of things in there. And now I'll let Matt move on to the next point.
Yeah, I mean, though, first of all, I'd like to point out, Tom, I'm never going to complain whenever you mention the NCSC because my swear jar is bulging at the moment. I'm going to
say it again.
But I noticed you were talking there about the methods that you can do it. You know, how much do you need and things like that. But what you didn't say is I assume that everyone could sort of do one of these techniques or tools or something like that and just sort of pay lip service to it. So how do you do it but actually do it well?
It's a tricky question, actually. You're right. How do you assure the assurance? You could just bundle through this and say, I've done
it's
some
getting
of the
very
things.
meta, this.
It is, isn't it? I know. That's coming up next, a 5-part. Yeah. If you're not doing assurance properly, then that's obviously not a good thing, right? Because you just don't know whether your security is any good. Right. So the first thing, and this goes back to that sort of the last thing I mentioned in the previous section about that question, asking yourself, what do I do? You need to do it, right? If the answer is, what do I do to make sure my security function performs? And the answer is nothing, you're not doing assurance, right? You need to do something. So the biggest thing I can tell you is don't just execute your risk management strategy and run away and get a coffee and ignore it. You need to be doing assurance, something, anything. That's the first step, is do something, right? Next level of maturity, I'd say, is having some kind of plan or schedule for the period. Maybe break it down. Cal Newport's all over this kind of thing. You can apply it to this kind of work too. Weekly, monthly, quarterly, yearly, whatever. What are you going to look at and when? You're going to cycle through your systems so that you cover them within an annual period. You've looked at least once at everything. Some things you might even look twice or 3 times at. But pace yourself, set it out, provide a schedule that provides rigor, it provides structure, and it can provide accountability as well if you share it with other people too. But the more often you check things, the better. The more familiar you'll become with it, and the less likely you are to be overloaded. So just having a schedule to do what you need to do. And then it's more than just the assurance activities that we mentioned themselves. It's not just a case of doing them. Maturity in this area means things like automating as much as you can and repeating those things as often as possible. So things like automating your asset inventory, you're automating your list of users and admins, or your software inventory. That's kind of stuff is really, really good because that saves you time. It's accurate, it's rigorous. You can run it as often as you want, and it means you're freed up to go and do other stuff as well. Situational awareness. This gets thrown around a lot. It's often badly defined, but basically what on earth is going on around you is a huge benefit. So constantly monitoring all of the areas where risk arises and to identify any changes. So things like making sure you're aware of the company's business objectives and that if there are any changes in them, you realize and recognize that. Ensuring that consequently you're able to keep track of the enabling functions and assets. Business priorities change, objectives change. The key assets that support those might be different this week than they were last week. Being on top of that will ensure that you've got no issues, right? Similarly, being aware of threats, threat intelligence feeds, going out reading threat intelligence and free threat intelligence assessments, things like the NCSC publish, and 50p in the jar. Vulnerabilities as well, yeah. So an impact on objectives of some kind of failure, that's probably more of an internal thing. But certainly just stepping back to threats and vulnerabilities, read the security news, right? Go on NetSec on Reddit, go on the Register, Wire, Bleeping Computer, listen to us, listen to Risky Business, maintain awareness of what's going on in the world, because you never know, that tiny little nugget, a 20-second segment on whatever, or that paragraph you read over here might pay you dividends further down the line when it comes to this. Also, things like automating and reporting on controls at the kind of delivery level, like training. Do you automatically track your training? If so, that's great. Things like approvals and review processes. So whether that's approving new devices for new joiners, or new accounts for joiners or leavers or admins, patching and software updates, are those automated and those recorded so you know where you're at? confirming you've got secure configurations and software installations, and that they're compliant with device policies. Are these all automated, and are they recorded somewhere? Are they tracked? Are they assured automatically? If so, that's great. The more tracking, the more automation, and the more kind of reporting you're able to do, the better you're doing. Toby has a question or a point.
I know it's striking. Again, we're talking about trust but verify. So like updates are a really great thing. Like Windows Enterprise, or even like small business fleets of Windows computers, you roll out from your Active Directory if you're on premise, or Entra, whatever it is now if you're in the cloud or using Intune, and you go, cool, update all my Windows machines, apply the latest update. And as an admin, you think you're done. But again, trust but verify, because 98% of the time, there'll be one computer that a user hasn't restarted for 4 months, or just the patch hasn't applied, or there's been a problem or misconfiguration. And you get caught out because you think it's been done, but you need assurance to know what is my actual patch state. Like the no longer NCSC, login made easy, swear jar 50p, was phenomenal. It had a dashboard in it created by Swift on Security, a really great ex-Twitter personality that had a whole bunch of dashboards to show you what your actual current patch state was and things like that in there. Sorry, I've gone off on one there, but again,
No,
it's true to stuff what you're saying.
That last was a really good point, actually, and I've not mentioned this. You brought it up. Visualizations and dashboards are super helpful, right, for maintaining assurance and knowing that you're doing it well, having confidence in it.
Yeah.
Being able to see, without looking down a long register, being able to see greens, ambers, reds on a screen, percentages, whatever, numbers, proportions, is really, really helpful. Sorry, Matt.
No. I was just going to say we've covered a lot of detail here, and I mean, I know every single listener sits there with a notepad taking down every bit of detail that we talk about for later. But are there any models that they could potentially use? And I have a feeling I'm going to regret asking this question.
The answer is absolutely, and it's the NCSC. But so I'm going to mention this for completeness because we love the NCSC, and because that jar is going to be our holiday fund pretty soon. Are there models for assurance? Yes, there are loads. It's a classic answer of don't feel you absolutely have to pick a model, but it's always good to have one rather than just making it up. And pick from one what works for you, what suits for you as a company. Don't break yourself in half just to follow someone else's model if some isn't working. But one thing I want to call out is that the NCSC does have some genuinely very good guidance on assurance. And it's based around their own assurance model, which breaks things down into kind of 4 categories of activities. And I think this is I wouldn't say you have to follow this model, but it's a good way of thinking about things potentially. So they break it down into intrinsic, extrinsic, implementation, and operational. So intrinsic is like things employed by the provider of products. So whoever makes something is responsible for those kind of assurances. Extrinsic is a trust that's been placed in a product or service once it's been provided. So has it gone like some kind of independent testing or validation or evaluation? Implementation, stuff that provides confidence that a service has been actually implemented correctly. And then operational, that basically means is it running properly? Is it doing its thing? It's a good model, and if you go and have a look at it, you'll see the kind of breaks the detail down. It's a very good way of visualizing it, I suppose. But I wouldn't force anybody to go any further than that with the model. It's pretty much useful. It's focused on enterprise IT systems, particularly or specifically where you have full ownership and control over your products and services, which is a diminishingly realistic prospect these days with cloud services and so on.
I'm not sure I understand it fully. So can I talk through an example to check my understanding on it?
Go for it.
So let's say I decided that I wanted to buy a new range of laptops, right? I'm going to buy them from Dell. I know they're a good supplier, and they're definitely not going to have a breach of any of my data or anything like that. Wait. So
don't call anybody out. Don't do that.
Well, they did get popped in the last couple of weeks. So I might go for look at I have laptop servers, etc., and each of them I've got these 4 things of intrinsic, extrinsic, implementation, operational. And I might not actually fill all of them. There might be blanks, there might be NAs. But so I go for my laptops. Dell says they are built using the latest build or hardware, and they test them themselves internally. That's the intrinsic picked. Extrinsic is they can provide me a third-party report to say that it's been independently tested to this particular level of security. I can't remember the levels that we had to learn for our CISOs once upon a time ago. Formally independent and verified, and level 4 could be retrofitted. Something I'm going to delete that bit. Implementation is my proof. Once I get it installed, I get it pen tested while it's installed to make sure the laptops are built correctly, and I make any tweaks, changes, something like that. is my implementation level, and my operational is monthly.
So there might be an architecture pattern that you're adhering to for that kind of implementation thing.
Yeah, cool. No, perfect. It's like basically like it's just going to go like by the supplier, by a third party of the supplier. Make sure you installed it, architected it correctly, and then your routine operational testing at like the 4 buckets you could drop into there.
Exactly. That is my understanding.
Cool.
The NCC are going to write us letters now.
Yeah, I think so. Well,
I'm sure that's right.
I've just got to. I was about to say that you should have mentioned that a couple of minutes earlier. I was just handing or getting our enormous wad of cash from the NCSC for plugging them quite so much, but the NCSC operative is left in a dark car. So I'm afraid I couldn't ask them if Toby's explanation was correct. But anyway, NCSC loving or hating, we've done a fair amount of this assurance for people, and we've helped them with it. And so, Tom, I mean, any advice or examples about that?
Yeah, we have. And I think typically people don't come to us and say, I want assurance, although it's kind of implied in what they're suggesting. Often people will come and say, I'm just really uncertain about this and I don't feel very comfortable. And they may or may not say, I'm not sleeping very well at night. That's a separate issue, I suppose. But it generally manifests with our customers. I'm saying this to be useful, that they don't upfront say it's assurance that I'm missing. That's more like, I'm just not very confident in this, or I think we're doing things right, but can you just check it for us and make sure that the security stuff we've got in place and our approach is even, because especially when you've got someone with a very particular environment, so they do a very particular part of a sector and they've got a very specific operational output, or they're making a very specific device or something. They don't know what's right because there's nothing to compare it to. It's a unique environment almost, or a very specific environment. So having someone else like us come in and just check it for them can be really useful. So where have we done this? We work for an airline operations company who are somewhat unique in what they do. Actually, there are very few of them in the world, in fact. And they have effectively said, are we doing this right? We've got this whole infrastructure solution here to provide the service we provide. Can you look at it and make sure that we've understood what it is we're doing from a security perspective correctly, and what we're trying to do, and we're doing it properly? So we went through their systems and spent a few weeks with them doing that. We've done this also for a charity, and I think we've mentioned this charity before, National Food Bank Charity. They were not very confident in the level of risk management with their suppliers. They have a lot of suppliers, particularly for IT services, whether that's cloud platforms or their enterprise IT, or they had a bespoke application. They wanted some kind of assurance that they were looking after those people and they were getting looked after by them properly. So we came in and did a review of all that and made some recommendations, which was really illuminating, actually, and hopefully very helpful. Well, it was very helpful. And the last one, I suppose, as an example, is kind of cover the spectrum, or parts of it at least, was a manufacturer of a hardware IoT device, Internet of Things device. Again, a somewhat specific hardware implementation or sort of solution that they'd built. And they wanted us to check that they had designed and were building it correctly, both from the device itself and also the kind of the cloud infrastructure back end. So we went through and did a proper common criteria assessment of that, proper security controls and so on, to provide, to assure them that what they're doing was right. A couple of things were missing, but otherwise pretty good. And they can use that as evidence to their customers that they sell to say, look, this has been, back to our extrinsic thing, this has been third party checked and verified to an extent.
That's great. So, yeah. Well, I suppose I think that's basically all we've got to say on the subject before the listeners switch off, and because we've got the real experts on these things back with us.
So the expert at summary, not the expert at the cybers. We've got Tom for that, right? Most of the time.
That's what we're calling him this week, are we?
Cyber Tom. I'm summarizer.
you are definitely our chief summarizer, Toby. So please, if you could work your magic.
I'm glad I've got some value. So to summarize what we've spoken about here and all the rest stuff, risk is about minimizing the exposure and vital level exposure we've spoken about. So how do you know that actually you're achieving the right things, what you're doing is correct? And I interrupted a couple of times ago. It's about trusting, but verifying you're doing things right. And how effectively do you verify things are going right and you're protecting the right things? So we spoke about what we could include for assurance, and there's a number of activities from kind of Mandronic going, checking that the right risks are identified, your approach is correct, and your controls are correct. And why you need it is things change all the time. Work you did 2 years ago might not be the case now, or default settings have changed, or cloud configs changed, a provider's been sold to someone else. And there's a number of tools we spoke about doing that, for kind of risk reviews, to security assessments, exercises, red teaming, training, or just asking yourself, is everything still true today as when I created that product, came up with that set of controls? How do you do it well? Well, having dashboards, awareness, situational awareness, automating things where you can is really, really key. And having visibility, again, trust but verify the patch has actually been applied. How can you see if that's the case? What's your lag time in there? You want to minimize that lag time between something supposedly happening and you finding out as CISO what the actual truth is. And that time to truth is really important. I invented a new metric, TTT.
Time to truth, I love it.
Yeah. And we spoke about a model for doing it, and the NCSC one and they look at 4 different things, like the supplier themselves, third-party assessment, how you implemented it, and how you're tracking day to day. Finally, Tom spoke about a couple of examples, and most people don't come to you going, tell me about my assurance, assure my cybersecurity. It's, can you check, help us with doing this right? How can you help us know that we're doing the right level of cybersecurity? We send these to a program potentially of more, or actually, no, you're doing a good job. So that's it. Assurance effectively is kind of the role of a CISO in a steady state, right? Of how do I do it? And it's how the CISOs know they're doing a good job, or cyber infosec managers or IT managers with security responsibilities. So that's my attempt at a summary. Tom, Matt,
I think it's a classic Toby summary.
Oh, beautiful.
Good. Listeners will be returning in their droves.
I'm excited.
I suppose before we sign off, have we got anything final to add, Tom?
Nothing to add from me. I think we've covered everything. Thank you,
Toby. I leave to you to close. Then, really.
Oh, I'm excited. So hopefully we taught you something over that series of risk episodes. Next, we'll be doing some more stuff around operational technology and industrial control systems. So James, who has not been on yet, will be talking about that. And then hopefully we'll have a guest to talk who does this stuff day to day, joining us for a second part. So that'll be really interesting. If you want help doing cybersecurity assurance, or you just want to chat, or you got ideas, please get in contact with us. We have done this for big and small customers. We offer some kind of free level of assurance for charities and operational technology. Find the details on our website. But please reach out or engage with us through that. And do that via our website, clearcutcyber.com, or email us info@clearcutcyber.com. And that's everything from me, Toby.
Me, Tom. See you next time.
And thank you very much for having me as a guest. Me, Matt.
We'll see if we allow him back, Tom. He's done pretty good.
He's done well.
Thanks, guys.
Cheers. Bye.
What's